Hi everyone, it's Jen with Freedom Fighters Spirited Saturdays, and this week we're talking about eating disorders and anxiety slash OCD. So I thought I would talk a little bit about about just my personal experience with this. I was a very anxious person growing up, and I know that it had a lot to do with the development of my eating disorder, but I was never diagnosed with OCD, but the anxiety really channeled itself into the eating disorder and kind of manifested in this insane control thing. And I became so particular to details and so particular to, like, oh man, like nothing was ever perfect. I don't just mean my body, anything like I do mean like the way I would put my socks on, or like the way I started having behaviors that I never had, even with a general anxiety diagnosis. I never had these behaviors. I think that eating disorders and anxiety and OCD type behaviors are very much interlinked, so it's sometimes hard to separate. I think it's important to figure out which came first, and then you can know the problem that you have to tackle. Maybe sometimes people deal with their OCD by by resorting to an eating disorder, so they feel like they can have some control over their OCD or something, or maybe like as a way of like dealing with it, or maybe a lot of people just they develop eating disorders and then all of a sudden have these OCD type symptoms. I think it's like it's just it has to do, I think, with reality, and with being so far removed from reality that you can rationalize obsessing over details that you never would have been able to rationalize before. And it's like this state where everything is like in this microcosm, and everything in your world is just it's like decreased, it's like compressed into like the tiniest little details. So all your problems are focused on, like, you could take like the energy and the strength and the size of all your problems and all of your reasons to be anxious and focus them on like whether your shoelace is tied right. And I think that like I would do things like that. I would do like the right shoelace is tied not tightly enough, and then like or it's like it's tied just tight enough, but the left one isn't tight enough, so I'd have to make the left one tighter, and then the right one. I would just go back and forth, and I could be stuck and fixated there for minutes. Like for me, it actually had to do, like, it played out in just like, all right, when I was little, I didn't care if I wore mismatched socks. Like, not little. If I, like, even a young adult, I didn't care if, like, I had two socks that were the same color but slightly different thickness. If I had to wear that, if I didn't have another option, I didn't care. But all of a sudden, when I developed an eating disorder, the more starved my brain got, the more I cared about that stuff. Like, I was like paralyzed in place. I wasn't able to leave my house or anywhere that I was staying, or when I went into treatment, the hospital room in the morning, until I knew that I had exactly the right combination of like socks. And it also never used to bother me if my sock was like against my like my calf. Like, it never bothered me before, like but for some reason when I developed, I guess the more kind of starved I became, the more I cared about things like tactile things and the way things felt against my skin, and I was aware of that, and I was very anxious about, like, am I going to be aware of this all day? And it was making me so anxious. Like, so that the physical things like that, and the mental things like the rituals, and the, for me it was a lot of counting and a lot of like just playing little games and like rationalizing with myself over how I'm allowed to eat something or what I'm allowed to eat. So this actually, for me, this applies more to anorexia than it does with bulimia for some reason, because I was bulimic and it didn't bring out this side of me. Yeah, I guess that's something to look at. Um, when I was bulimic, I just didn't care about any of that, like anything at all. It went the other extreme, and I think like, yeah, with anorexia, everything kind of just I had like a tightened grip on everything, and it just manifested in all of these thought rituals and in all of these like needs to have everything be perfect. Pertaining to my physical state, not so much like the things around me. But I know a lot of people are like very meticulous about having to kind of like fold their clothes the right way and check things. I did a lot of checking. I did a lot of like doorknob checking. All of these things I didn't do before the development of the eating disorder. I may have had inklings of some of them, but the ED really made them surface. So I guess that's my personal experience with that part of it. Now that I'm in recovery, it's amazing to me the difference. Like again, this is not so much applicable with bulimia for me. That's a little bit different. But with anorexia, being in recovery, eating enough and maintaining a healthy body weight, oh my goodness, it's astonishing. The difference is astonishing, and I didn't even notice as it went away. But I can see it now. I don't fixate much on those things anymore. I do a little bit, and sometimes I feel held up in the morning, and sometimes I do feel that attachment to detail, or that like need to just be okay, like texturally, like like in like a tactile sense. But I experience it in glimpses, and it doesn't get out of hand the way it used to. So I am a full believer and advocate that is pretty much entirely because I've eaten enough over a long enough period of time. I have gained enough weight, and I've maintained that weight. And so my brain is functioning, my body is functioning, and I'm not like, I don't feel so stuck in that regard. I mean, and this applies to food as well. Even early on in my recovery, this stuff was still going on early on in my recovery. It was one of the last things to go, like when I was out of like acute treatment, the obsessions and all that. But it applied to food as well. I mean, before I went into treatment, I would really just not be able to leave a grocery store for a really long time. I would just feel absolutely stuck and like frozen in a grocery store, checking everything. And it was embarrassing, but I couldn't stop it. It was actually embarrassing. I was embarrassed for myself. Some days I just had to say like, forget it, and I would just like throw away or just put aside whatever it was I was gonna get, because it made me so anxious, because nothing was ever perfectly fitting together just right or just so. Everything had to be bargained with. How am I gonna, like, what's gonna come later now as a result of eating this, or what significance does this choice mean? And I would just go over and over, oh my goodness. And sometimes I would see other people too, they would be doing that, and I would be like, it was like a combination of like anger, frustration, and wanting to empathize and relate and reach out, and I couldn't do any of that, or like act on any of that. But just like those things have, they really got bad when I was in starvation mode. They have gotten so much better, and I'm not saying that they're completely gone, because I still have urges to check those kinds of things, but I might spend like 5 seconds now, which obviously my goal is to not ever check ever. I mean, or hardly, or like, unless it's something that actually matters to me. Like I want to see a vital ingredient that's in something or whatever, like not having to do with an eating disorder, but for the most part, like, yeah, so I basically want to, my goal is to get rid of the like checking entirely. But I also noticed that I'm a lot less attached to that like process and that like paralysis that comes from those like obsessive intrusive thoughts. Yeah, so that's kind of how it's played out for me. Like I said, I mean, before I developed the eating disorder, I did have anxiety, I did have panic, I did have all those things. Actually, what happened with me is when I relapsed, right before I relapsed, maybe in a couple of months before, I was having severe anxiety and panic attacks, like actual thinking I was going to die, like tremors, panic attacks. Really, really bad. And they would often be related to food, like thinking I swallowed something the wrong way and that I was going to like suffocate to death. Like that would always be like the recurring theme. And so it's just interesting to me that that was all happening. And then I relapsed into the eating disorder and that stopped. So it's just interesting that it played out that way and that it manifested that way, which is something that I still need to look at because they're very closely related. You know, I even remember the first time, like years ago, before I developed bulimia, I was really like psychosomatic. Like there was something going on before I developed bulimia. It was like this little something going on in my head. Like it was, I know it was a manifestation of anxiety and stress. But at the time, there was no way for me to know that. So I was going to like a doctor. I was like, what's going on? It felt like this little shock in my head. But nothing ever came of it. My heart would speed up. Like I have a feeling, and I really think it was anxiety. I also, you know, at that time was starting to think about not eating. And so it was all kind of intertwined. And then I developed first like restrictive tendencies, but then bulimia. And then that, like, as soon as I started that, it stopped. As soon as I started that, like the symptoms, the physical symptoms of anxiety that I was experiencing before stopped. So it's interesting how the eating disorder behaviors are a way of manifesting perhaps what was like a current of anxiety beforehand that didn't have anywhere to like channel itself, and now the eating disorder gives it something to channel itself into. Yeah, so it's a whole, there's so many reasons and there's so many kind of orders and combinations of this. But yeah, I guess the point that I would drive home would be that like the eating disorder would be a way of channeling pre-existing anxiety, but also it would be a way of making you think that you have anxiety problems that you actually don't have, because you can see that in the absence of the eating disorder, they're not there, such as the OCD tendencies. They're kind of secondary to the eating disorder. So that's just my personal experience with this, and I hope that gives people hope that just knowing that once you're in recovery, a lot of those things do diminish. If they don't diminish and you're legitimately in recovery, then you may have an anxiety problem that you need to check out, and that's separate. But the stuff that came about with the eating disorder, I assure you, it goes away, or it greatly diminishes, and I imagine over time will go away as long as you keep in recovery. So yeah, I don't know if anybody's like kind of holding on to the eating disorder because they're thinking like they're gonna have these obsessions no matter what, and the eating disorder is like just a way of dealing with them. Like it's not. It came about largely probably because of the ED, and when the ED goes away, they'll probably go away, you know. But I think patience is a huge factor. It took a little bit for it to really like shrink in size, like obsession. It took a while for the obsessions to kind of lose their power. So, but I assure you that they do, and it gets a lot better. So yeah, just keep yourself in check with all of that. Keep monitoring symptoms of anxiety and seeing kind of like which ones correlate with the eating disorder, which ones were there before, which ones kind of stick around after, and keep them in check so that you don't, you know, use your eating disorder to deal with them. Like, and then it becomes a cycle. Like you're anxious, so you're going to be in your eating disorder, and then you're going to be more anxious, you know. So yeah, just that would be try to keep tabs on that, and yeah, I hope my experience was relatable to some of you and gave some hope. All right, have a great week, and see you next Saturday. Bye.